organized this event in line with the Sri Lanka National Science Week, currently which we are celebrating from 10th to 16th November 2022 under the theme of Global Trend with Local Blend Science for Sustainable Future. Once again, I will thank you for all the participants, and I'm sure that it will be one of the great opportunity we provided by our Indian colleagues. I invite to play the Gnostic corporate video in line with the theme of the global trend with local blend. So we will watch that a brief documentary before we start the formal session. Momita, can you play that video, please?
Yeah, we are playing. We are.
Global trend with a local blend. Science for sustainable future. Science for policy. Gnostic. Science is the seed of growth and development. It favors no color or race. The strength of science, technology and innovation, also known as STI, can be used to uplift the socio-economic status of a nation sustainably. However, by providing a series of sound policies, frameworks and guidelines, actors from various sectors are given how to play at the science policy public interface. The National Science and Technology Commission, also known as Gnostic, is an apex body that advises the government on policy formulation in science and technology matters to uplift the country's socio-economic status as per the Science and Development Act 1994/11. Since the Commission's inception, several cabinet-approved national policies and strategies, as well as technical reports and policy briefs in the S&T sector have been developed, and these have played an important role at critical junctures in the interface of science policy media public from time to time. To name a few: water, food, nutrition and agriculture, health, shelter, environment, energy, mineral resources, textile apparel, ICT, basic sciences, emerging technologies, and indigenous knowledge have been identified as areas of STI to be prioritized to deal with national issues proactively by strengthening evidence-based decision-making, science for policy. Science policy is concerned with the allocation of resources for the conduct of science towards the goal of best serving the public interest. Science for policy. Science advice is the process, structures and institutions through which governments and politicians consider science, technology and innovation, information in policy and decision making. Sri Lanka is a country with a rich heritage of indigenous knowledge systems that were developed through extensive and close contact with nature. Industrialized civilization, however, results in moral catastrophes. This has led to major issues like pandemics, natural disasters, and climate change, to name a few. The world has acknowledged the issue and is now working to fix it by switching to more ecologically friendly models and paradigms. Our goal is to foster a world of discovery for communities so they may benefit from science and technology in ways we haven't quite caught up yet. However, this presents an excellent opportunity to shift the tide towards opportunities by redefining ambitious, action-oriented and collaborative strategies for innovating, inventing and putting them into practice, as well as bolstering the use of science for policy evidence-based decisions. The blessed land of Sri Lanka has raised exceptionally talented brains throughout the years of high-standard education. And also, the country's youth are gifted with novel ideas and more creative scientific approaches. The practical application of those beneficial ideas, theories and strategies and the country's natural resources legitimately aspire to economic and social progress towards attaining sustained economic recovery. Consistent and tireless innovation in every field of study, sector and service through evidence-based decision-making, the science for policy can transform our nation to overcome the current socio-economic distress and look forward to a better tomorrow. That would also strengthen where science and technology provide a robust framework to play a critical role in uplifting the economy via lofty SDG 2030 commitments. Let us work together to build a nation that will be able to provide a bright future for the leaders of tomorrow's generations.
Thank you for playing that video, Dr. Pragya. So next in our agenda that I would like to invite my colleague, the moderator, Dr. Maumita Kohli. She holds a PhD in organic chemistry from the Vienna University of Technology, and she will be the today moderator for the event. And she synthesized new biological active compounds and designed novel synthetic routes using metal and enzymes as a catalyst during her PhD and postdoctoral research. And I invite the Dr. Maumita to take over the event and go forward. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shami, for the kind introduction. Yes. Actually, we had recently organized a virtual conference on the relevance of open science for South Asia. And the request for today's lecture streamed from the activity of the conference. Today's lecture is about Scientometrics, and Scientometrics helps us to understand the structure and impact of science policy, and communications in science. For this lecture, we have with us Professor Vivek Singh, who is the leading expert of Scientometrics in India. A little bit about Professor Singh. So he is a professor in computer science at Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi, India. His primary research interests are in text analytics, Scientometrics, and information system. Professor Singh is a senior member of IEEE and member of ACM and IEEE CS. His research on text analytics and Scientometrics is funded by various government organizations, not just in India, but from outside as well. We are very excited to have him on board for this lecture. Before I hand over to Professor Singh, a few housekeeping rules. Please keep your video and microphone turned off during the lecture. After the talk, we will take a few questions. Please write them on the chat box. And if time permits, we probably would take a few questions from YouTube channel stream as well. So without wasting any more time, I now invite Professor Vivek Singh. Over to you, Professor Singh.
Thank you, Maumita. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. Maumita, I'm clearly audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you. So just give me a sec to share my screen. Okay. So, it's my pleasure to be here and to be talking to a large audience about Scientometrics. So this is something that I do out of passion. I'm basically from computer science, and as part of the research that we do in computer science, Scientometrics provides another kind of data analytics that we are interested in, and we have been doing it for the last 6-7 years. And we find it very much fascinating, taking into account the fact that there's a lot of things that we can do using Scientometrics, and the potential and promise that Scientometrics has makes it more interesting to do Scientometrics. So today's talk would be largely introductory, where I assume that people are not experts in Scientometrics. So based on my feedback, so this is largely about introducing Scientometrics as a discipline, as a methodology, as an approach. What is the promise that Scientometrics has? What are the things that we can do with Scientometrics? The bottom line would be whether Scientometrics can be used as an evidence-based policy tool, because this is something that is very much talked across the world, that science policy should be evidence-based. And Scientometrics is a tool, it's a discipline, it's an approach which is able to generate a lot of evidence for policy formulation. So that is how Scientometrics as a discipline is very useful, that it could contribute in a number of ways for policy. And not only in terms of formulation of the policy, but also in terms of monitoring how things are going. So my talk would be organized on these lines. So this is a quick outline. So we'll have basically 5 parts. The first part would be the quickest one, which talks about trying to introduce formally what is Scientometrics. So we'll look at certain definitions and also a very brief history, because to introduce Scientometrics, it takes a lot of time. So I would be talking only about the most important aspects of the history. Then we move to metrics in science. Now, metrics is an essential component. All STI indicators is an essential component of Scientometrics. So we'll look at some metrics in science. And then we look at how do we make these metrics? How do we compute these metrics? So what is the data source where we get the data from? So scholarly databases, we'll have a quick look at scholarly databases. What are the things that are available in these databases, how these databases can be used, and how these databases are used for computing different metrics. And then finally, the other 2 parts where we look at science policy and Scientometrics. So this would be the interplay between Scientometrics and science policy, which we are going to look at. And finally, limitations and challenges. So like any other discipline, Scientometrics has its own limitations, and it has to be used in a proper manner, because if there's a tendency that people who don't understand Scientometrics well, they're also trying to generate indicators, metrics, and so on, and many times they end up in an inappropriate use of these metrics. So that is very problematic, because it has to be used in a constructive manner, in a manner where it is useful. So this is how the talk would be organized. Let's start with the first part, introduction, definitions, and brief history. Well, if we go with definition, the first formal definition about Scientometrics is 1969, which says Scientometrics is quantitative methods of research on development of science as an informational process. So, and if you see this underlined part, study of the quantitative aspects of science and technology seen as a process of information/communication. So one fundamental thing that is there in Scientometrics is that Scientometrics is concerned with science as an information production process. So if we visualize science as an IPP, we call it information production process, then Scientometrics is there, or Scientometrics is something which comes into play if we visualize the science as an information production process. So what we try to do is we try to study the information production process in terms of different metrics, in terms of quantitative indicators, and that is how this whole discipline of Scientometrics is about. Now, some of the main themes include ways of measuring research quality, impact, understanding the process of citation, mapping scientific fields, and use of indicators in research policy and management. There are certain other terms which are related to Scientometrics, and in fact, there's a close connection between Scientometrics and many other terms that you're going to hear. For example, bibliometrics is a relatively older term, and many times we often use interchangeably bibliometrics and Scientometrics. Bibliometrics slightly broader. It is slightly older in terms of use. Scientometrics is a newer term and it is more focused. So what is bibliometrics? It says that it was first proposed in 1934 and a more formal definition in 1969, which says application of mathematics and statistical methods to books and other media of communication. Now it is something similar to what we saw for Scientometrics, where we say quantitative approaches applied to science as an IPP. Another related term is infometrics, which says the definition by Naki in 1979 says it is a study of application of mathematical methods to objects of information science. There are two other terms, webometrics, which is largely concerned with the web presence of scientific institutions, libraries, and so on, and altmetrics, which stands for alternative metrics, which is a new kind of metric that has emerged post 2014, where researchers talk about the impact of science, not only in terms of the scientific impact measured in terms of citations, but also how much science is getting attention in alternative media, like social media platforms, news sources, and so on. So that is how people try to measure what is the impact or what is the attention level in alternative media, like, which is not the mainstream scientific media, but something that is related to more common public, more general public. So these are certain terms, but I would just request you all to focus on one particular line, which is science as an information production process. So if you're looking at science as an information production process, then any quantitative method that you apply, that would qualify to be called as Scientometrics. Now, what is the scientific output in an information production process? So we have, publication. For example, we have articles, research articles, conference proceedings, reviews, book chapters, preprints, books. We have patents, we have clinical trials, we have softwares, we have data sets, we have policy documents. So there are different kinds of scientific outputs that are produced once an individual or a group of individuals do science. Now, if we go to a little bit of history in terms of how is contemporary Scientometrics nowadays and what are the major contributions that we can see. So there are different perspectives through which Scientometrics has evolved over a period of time. For example, there was a wonderful work by Derek de Solla Price on history of science. Then Nellie Moore talked about philosophy of science. Eugene Garfield talked about, information science. He talked about information science as an information production process. Then Robert K. Merton talked about sociology of science. How do people come together to do science? How do research teams are organized? How do we organize institutions of science and so on? And then mathematical quantities and how do we use them? So I'm not going to look into all of them in detail, but I'm just going to mention about some of them. For example, we can look at the work of Derek de Solla Price. Well, a wonderful book. If you get a chance, please go through it. Little Science, Big Science, 1963. It was where he proposed and analyzed the recent systems of science communication and presented the first systematic approach to structure of science of science. So what he proposed can be summarized using this last line. Why should we not turn the tools of science on science itself? So what he proposed essentially is that we can use scientific methods to study science. And that is how we call it science of science. And this laid the foundation of modern research evaluation techniques. So systematic methods, scientific methods applied to understand scientific research itself, to understand science communication, to understand science dissemination, to understand information production in science. So that is how Derek de Solla Price visualized Scientometrics as a discipline. Then a lot of contribution from Eugene Garfield. He was the founder and chairman of the Institute for Scientific Information, which developed this citation index, which is very popularly known, Science Citation Index. And it was Eugene Garfield who proposed this idea of journal impact factor, which is very heavily used nowadays and sometimes abused as well. It was first used as a measure for comparing journals independently of size and to help selection of journals for SCI. So initially, the Science Citation Index was not supposed to be used for research evaluation. It was proposed to be a tool for helping in scientific information retrieval. So what Garfield wanted is that if we could have a database where all major scientific papers could be indexed, and anybody who's looking for paper in a particular area can retrieve papers from this particular index. And also, if there could be a way of, understanding the links of citations that goes from one paper to another paper in this whole collection in this whole database. So in 1970s and 1980s, Scientometrics evolved gradually towards research evaluation. So that was not the original purpose. So Science Citation Index came up in the 60s. And in about 10 years, people realized that this Science Citation Index can also be used for some kind of research evaluation. But it still continues to provide tools for retrieval and information. So if you want to use Web of Science, which is now the common name for Science Citation Index, Social Science Citation Index, and Arts and Humanities Citation Index, you can use Web of Science as a scholarly article retrieval database. So you can retrieve scholarly articles from this particular database. So the retrieval function still continues. In addition to that, what has been added is the research evaluation part, which was not there as the initial mandate. Then we have Robert Merton, who represents the sociologist view of Scientometrics. Major contributions includes ideas related to science and its measurement, and the notion of citation as a reward system. What he studied essentially is that who are the people who do science? How do people come together and they form team in order to do science? How are institutions created for doing science? So the whole process of institutionalizing the conduct of science is something that Robert Merton tried to study, and that is how this view is known as sociologist view of Scientometrics. He was essentially a sociologist, and in fact, it's a whole discipline of science technology studies which follows Mertonian approach, which is called qualitative approach. So in science technology studies, there are now broadly two different directions which often interact with each other as well. One of them is quantitative approach, which is more closer to Scientometrics. The other is qualitative approach, which is more closer to Mertonian's view, where we try to understand the sociological processes which are underlying the conduct of science. So science policy in Scientometrics, as I said, it was not there initially in terms of evolution of Scientometrics, but the science indicators movement in US in 1970s, it was that bibliometrics can be used for creation of a lot of science indicators, that Scientometrics and bibliometrics started to be used as research evaluation purpose. So besides information science and sociology of science, science policy became the third driving force in evolution of Scientometrics. So science is the Garfield's view of information production process. Sociology of science is the Mertonian view of sociology of science, and science policy was the new angle which came up in terms of contribution as form of research evaluation exercise. So Scientometrics now deals with almost all of them as an IPP, as a sociologist view of science, and also as a tool for science policy. Scientometrics in 1970s and 80s, institutionalization process started, and it marks an evolution of invisible college to establish the field of intersection of. Now, this is what we say. It is a field which is on the intersection of information science, computer science, and sociology of science. And there are a lot of activities that characterize the practice of Scientometrics. Documented scholarly communication, structured in scientific research, public perception and visibility, and so on. Major milestones in terms of institutionalization, well, a lot of centers were created. So the initial centers were in Germany, Hungary, ISSRU, Netherlands. The two major centers are CWTS and one at the Amsterdam. France and Spain has a lot of centers now. Foundation of International Scientific Journals. So the first scientific journal started in 1978, Scientometrics, followed by Research Evaluation in 1991, and the Journal of Informatics in 2007. Then major conferences started in 87, 88. EC, which is the biennial international conference on Scientometrics and Informatics, started in 1987. Then we have Science Technology Indicators Conference, started in 88. Colnet started in 1998. And the International Society for Scientometrics and Informatics, it was formed in 1993. And it is now the society which organizes EC events every 2 years at different locations. So historically, when we see the evolution, there are two broad approaches. One of them is quantitative approach, which largely deals with metrics for scientific research. So it deals with bibliometrics represented as a statistical approach. So what we try to do is we try to measure a lot of quantitative aspects of science as an IPP. We try to monitor, describe, and model production, dissemination, and use of knowledge. We try to provide the results to scientists and users outside the scientific community for various purposes, science policy formulation being one of them. The other view is qualitative studies, which tries to measure who are the people who do science and how do they organize themselves. For example, it tries to measure the social ties. It tries to understand the meaning and characteristics of scientific communities. It tries to draw conclusions concerning institutional organization of science systems. But if we look at the more recent research in the qualitative approach, it is more focused on innovation studies approach. So innovation studies approach is the current focus of qualitative studies approach. And quantitative approach is more closer to STI indicators and their use in science policy formulation. Let's now come to the second part, which is on metrics in science. Well, we all know metrics are units to measure. So metrics are used to measure different components. Now it could be, as we use kilogram to measure weight, as we use meter to measure distance. Similarly, we use a lot of metrics to measure science and different components of science. Now, metrics in science and research try to measure different kinds of impact. For example, we have author impact, we have institutional impact, we have journal impact, and many other things. Metrics are also being used for research evaluation and also for performance-based funding, either done at ex ante basis or done ex post basis. Now, this has also been used independently or in combination with peer review. So Scientometrics as a tool for performance-based funding is becoming very popular, and there is overall a global shift from trust-based systems to performance-based funding of science. And that is where Scientometrics and research evaluation has a bigger role to play. Now, STI indicators could be of different kind. We may have indicators of productivity. For example, we have measures of publishing behavior. We have indicators of impact. For example, citation. Citations, we all may be aware that it's a very popularly used measure for scientific impact, and new alternative metrics are also being explored. Then we have indicators of journal quality. For example, prestige of a publication source, like journal impact factor, like site score. And then we have normalized impact scores and so on. So there are a lot of examples. For example, total papers of a unit, total citations that a unit receives or an individual, average citation per paper, cited uncited ratio, then different H-type indices, for example, H, G, H, P, and so on. Then we have journal metrics like impact factor, site score, and so there are different kind of metrics that are very popularly used in Scientometrics as a practice. There are some guidelines that you can use. So there are two wonderful manuals that you can refer to. One of them is Compendium of Bibliometric Science Indicators by OECD 2016. The other one is Oslo Manual 2018. And then there are some other publications that could be useful. So these two are benchmark manuals that you can refer to if you want to know more about research evaluations, more so at the level of nations and at regional level. Now, impact factor is one such measure that I just want to quickly talk about. Most of you may already be aware of impact factor. So let's quickly go through it. So what we know is that impact factor is a dynamic thing. It changes. Impact factor of a journal changes every year. So if we want to compute impact factor of a journal, let's say in 2017, what we have to look at the number of times publications during 2 previous years have been cited in the current year. So what we do is, in 2017, how many times papers published in 2016 were cited in 2017? So let's assume that this is 238. The papers published in 2015 were cited 403 times in 2017. So what we do is we sum both of them and we say that the papers published during 2 previous years have been cited 641 times in the current year. Next, what we do is we normalize it by the number of papers published. So what we say is that this is the numerator. The total number of citations in the current year for the publications during 2 previous years becomes numerator. And the total number of publications in 16 and 15, we add them together and this becomes my denominator. And then we divide numerator by denominator and we get impact factor, which is in this case 1.4 to 1. So people try to generalize impact factor by saying that if impact factor for journal is high, then the chances of a paper published in that journal getting more citations is higher, which may not be true always. Now, this is JCR for 2020. As you could see here, the largest impact factor is for CA Cancer Journal for Clinicians, which is 508.702. So on an average, publications during 2 previous years, that is 2019 and 18, has been cited 508 times each in the year 2020. So it is not actually each, but it is an average. So it's a single value summary, which is the measure of total average citations per papers during 2 previous years, published during 2 previous years. So this is quartile 1. Now, I would also like to show you, impact factor may be problematic in some ways or in some sense, in the sense that, for example, just look at this same journal, which has the highest impact factor of 508.7 in 2020, JCR 2020. We have total citations 55,868, and the JCR for this is 508.7 without. Now, does it mean that each article is likely to be cited 500 times? Well, if we look at the average, it says this, that each article is likely to be cited 508 times. And one single paper alone accounts for more than, the actual thing is that one single paper alone accounts for more than 12,000 citations. So out of total papers published in this journal, only one paper, which was on a data set for cancer research, it has been cited 12,000 times. So what will happen? This is an outlier which has actually increased the impact factor of this journal. And by the way, you may be interested to know that the impact factor for the current year for the same journal is now 252. So you can look at the fact that impact factor is so dynamic that it has reduced by half. It is now almost half what it was in 2020. Site score is another such measure. It is similar to impact factor. Site score is computed by Scopus, except that what we do here is we take the 3-year publication data. The 3 years. So, for example, if you want to measure the site score of a journal in 2015, you have to look at the total number of citations in 2015 for the papers published during 3 previous years, divided by total number of papers published during these previous years. So, site score is a 3-year average citation per paper. Now, again, this is a Scopus report. Another measure, H index, which is very popularly used. I'm trying to tell you these metrics because these metrics are not kind of gold standard, that they are free from all kind of limitations. They have their own limitations, and that is how Scientometrics has to be an informed Scientometrics, where people who do Scientometrics will really need to understand where Scientometrics can be used, for what purposes it can be used, and how it has to be used. Now, the other index, H index, again, I picked it up because it is very popular index and it is very popularly used. Now, we know that a scholar with index H, how do we compute it? What we do is we sort the number of papers published by a particular individual in descending order. So this is the descending order of citation. So this is the highest cited paper, second highest cited, third highest cited, fourth highest cited, and so on. Then we look at the largest value of H, where each paper above this has been cited at least H or more than H times. Now it can be used, it has been used, and it is being used for journals, it is being used for departments, it is being used for individuals, for university, or even a country. So H index can be used for any unit, and it is being used for many units. In fact, in many universities across the world, if you apply for a postdoctoral position or for a faculty position, they often ask you to quote your H index. So until your H index is above a threshold, you're unlikely to be called for that particular or shortlisted for that particular position. So I have included an example to show calculation of H index. Now look here. This author one. Author one has. So let's assume that author one has published a total of 12 papers during the career, and out of them, they are arranged in the descending order of citation. The first paper is cited 260 times, second 134 times, and so on. So what would be the H index for this person? The H index first is cited more than 1 time, second is cited more than 2 times, third is cited more than 3 times, fourth is cited more than 4 times, fifth is cited more than 5 times, sixth is cited more than 6 times, but 7 paper is not cited 7 or more than 7 times. So the largest number is 6. So all these papers above 6 are cited at least 6 or more than 6 times. So H index for this person would be 6. Now look at the second author. Only published 9 papers, and all of them are published, have been cited more than 9 or more than 9 times. So H index for this author would be 9. Now look at third author. Published only 6 papers, and all of them are cited. The first is cited more than 1, second is cited more than 2, third is cited more than 3, fifth is cited more than 5, sixth is cited more than 6. So because this author published only 6 papers, all of them are cited more than 6 times. So the H index for this author is 6. Now, if we go only by a number of H index and we try to arrive at a conclusion that second author is the best author because author 2 has an H index, highest H index, it may be flawed in one or other ways. Now look at the third author, somebody who has published very less, but cited many, many more times as compared to author number 2. Okay. So H index is a measure which tries to measure both quantity and quality. So quantity in terms of how many papers you publish, and quality in terms of how many times papers that you publish are cited. So if you're publishing more but cited less, your H index would be lower. If you're publishing less but cited more, again your H index would be lower. If you're publishing more and you're cited more times, then only then your H index would be higher. So H index again has to be used with a caution. Now there are about 3,160 people who have Google Scholar H index of more than 100. Now the largest being 279. There are other indices also that are used. And in fact, in India, the Department of Science and Technology, Ministry of Science and Technology has also started using them. I-10 index is normally quoted in extramural research funding applications. So I-10 is a simple linear count. How many of your papers are cited 10 or more than 10 times? So that is called I-10 index. Similarly, you make it I-20. How many of your papers are cited 20 or more than 20 times? That becomes I-20 index. Now, both of them are author impact matrices, and they are used because they're very simple to calculate. They're simple linear calculations. And the advantage is that they're very simple and straightforward. The other thing where metrics is being used is in terms of international rankings. Most of you may already be aware of international rankings which are published for universities across the world every year. Now, the key popular ones include Academic Ranking of World Universities, Quackrelli-Simons, and Times Higher Education. Several international rankings are known. Out of them, these 3 are popular. Others are also there. For example, URAP, Leiden, and there are many other rankings, and there are many national rankings as well. For example, in India, there's a new ranking which was introduced in 2016 called National Institutional Ranking Framework, which tries to rank universities on different parameters, including scientific research. Now, there are issues of underrepresentation of institutions from developing countries. For example, RW 2020, only 15 Indian institutions figure out of 1,000 listed there. 35 Indian institutions figure in QS, and 63 Indian institutions figure in 1,526 institutions listed in Times Higher Education. Now, none of them is going to serve the purpose of any national ranking, because in case of India, we have more than 900 universities, we have more than 50,000 colleges, but the best coverage is only of 63 institutions, which is for Times Higher Education. If we want to know the relative performance of others, there's no international ranking which is available. So we have to develop our own national ranking exercise, and that is how probably NIRF has developed. So as I just said, look at the parameters that are used and where Scientometrics is playing a role here. Now, there are in ARWU, there are 4 major criteria that are used: quality of education, quality of faculty, research output, and per capita performance. Now, quality of education is measured in terms of how many Nobel laureates, how many alumni from your university are Nobel laureates or field medalists. Now, this has a weight of 10%. Then, quality of faculty, staff as a Nobel laureate and field medalist, 20% weight. How many highly cited researchers are there in 21 broad subject categories? 20%. Now, this is computed by using Scientometric indicators and by getting data from scholarly databases. Then we have research output. How many papers are published in Nature and Science by the faculty or students? It has a weight of 20%. Papers published in Science Citation Index Expanded and Social Science Citation Index, it again has a weight of 20%. And then per capita academic performance of an institution is 10%. So these are certain measures. Now, what you can see here is a lot of them, for example, all these four measures, they're all based on Scientometric calculations, and they're calculated by getting the data from different scholarly databases. Now, ARWU uses a scholarly database, Web of Science, for doing all these computations. QS is another ranking, QS World University Ranking. Well, started in 2004. From 2004, it was with the, but since 2010, it has become independent, and the has become independent ranking. Now, look here, what are the metrics that they compute? They have academic reputation, which has a weight of 40%. Now, this is computed based on surveys. Employer reputation, again, survey data, 10%. So 50% of weight is given to survey data. The rest of them, faculty-student ratio is a direct data for 20%. Citations per faculty, international faculty ratio, international student ratio, 5%, 5%, 20%, and this. So here, the Scientometric calculation is only this part, which is citation per faculty, 20%. And top institutions, as we know, the top 3 are MIT, Oxford, and Stanford. Now, QS has also started subject-based ranking. So you can filter by a country, you can filter by a subject. Times Higher Education Ranking, which is also known as World University Ranking, it has 13 parameters. Now you see here the parameters. So my main interest is in this part, which is drawn from Scientometrics as a practice, except in this reputation survey. So we have papers per researcher and academic staff, public research income divided by total research income, citation impact. So all these are essential calculations which are done by taking the data from scholarly databases. And this also uses reputation surveys, for example, 15% here, and reputation survey 19.5% for research. Now, given that we know there are a lot of metrics that exist, the next question would be, how do we compute? Where do we get the data from for computing these metrics? So that is where we need to look at scholarly databases. Scholarly databases are the databases which provide the data necessary to compute different metrics. Now, the popular ones include Web of Science, which is the oldest, created in 1964. Scopus, created in 2004. Google Scholar, also created in 2004. And a new entry, which is Dimensions, created in 2018. Now, out of these 4 databases, 3 of them are manually curated. So all of this, Web of Science, Scopus, and Dimensions, they use manual curation for populating the data. Whereas Google Scholar, it uses web crawlers to get the data from the web. And what it does essentially is it uses crawlers to classify electronic item on the web as a research article, provided it has a lot of references to research articles. So based on that, that is also counted as a research article, and it automatically indexes all these data items. Now, as a result, Google Scholar often has a lot of problems of reliability and accuracy of data, because many times one particular paper is available in different formats, different places. For example, your own research paper, you may upload it to ResearchGate, you may upload it in your institutional repository, it may be available in the journal itself. So there may be multiple copies that Google Scholar may be indexing. because it looks at all these sources as independent. It tries to merge them by showing that there are related versions for the same article, but still there may be problems where it tries to have it goes for multiple counting of citations and so on. Now, Web of Science, as I said, it is the oldest, most selective database, created in 1964. Initially, it was not known by the name Web of Science. It was called Science Citation Index. SCI was the initial name in 1964. Later on, it was expanded, and now we know it as Science Citation Index Expanded, SCIE. Now, its core collection indexes about 13,600 journals. So all articles published in these 13,600 journals, they would be indexed in Web of Science. It has publication records from 1900 onwards. And Web of Science is essentially a combination of three major indices: SCI, so Science Citation Index; SSCI, which is called Social Science Citation Index; and HCI, which is called Arts and Humanities Citation Index. Now, out of this, journals indexed in SCI and SSCI, we compute impact factor, and AHCI, we don't compute impact factor. Now, please also note that impact factor is a trademark calculation of Web of Science. Now, Web of Science is currently owned by a company called Clarivate Analytics. So nobody else can compute impact factor and can say that this is the trademark impact factor calculation. So it has more than 1.4 billion cited references. And if we include the newer one, so there's a new citation index that Clarivate has introduced, which is called ESCI. So you may have come across this new one, which is called Emerging Sources Citation Index. So if you include that also, the Web of Science, including SCI, will have about 20,000 journals indexed. Now, this is very less, taking into account the fact that we have about 100,000 journals published in the world. So out of that 100,000 journals published in the world, only about 20,000 journals, which is about 1/5, which are indexed in Web of Science. So in that sense, Web of Science is very selective. And that is how there is a prestige associated with Web of Science, that if you publish in a journal which is indexed in Web of Science, normally people say that it is a good publication. Scopus is the second database, which is slightly more expanded in terms of coverage as compared to Web of Science. Now, it is a product of Elsevier, created in 2004. It indexes about 40,000 journals. So it is almost double the size of Web of Science if we take ESCI included. And it has records from 1996 onwards. Then we have Google Scholar, which was created in 2004. Now, unlike Web of Science and Scopus, it is not a curated database. What it does, it uses web crawlers that have references to papers and books. And we have higher coverage, but there are issues of reliability and quality. However, it is a very popular database. One of the major reasons for that, it is free to use. So Web of Science, Scopus, and Dimensions, they need subscription in order to use them, whereas Google Scholar is free to use. If you have an institutional email ID, you can create your profile on Google Scholar. And even if you don't have it, even then you can use Google Scholar to search for research articles. And the other best part in Google Scholar is that Google Scholar also gives you pointers to local copies. So if you have a research paper, which is published in a journal which is behind a paywall, but you have deposited your paper in some disciplinary repository or institutional repository, which is web discoverable, Google Scholar is most likely going to point to that as an alternative source for that research article. So people can look at alternative sources of research articles which may not be accessible because they are behind a paywall. Dimensions is the newer one. Digital Science is the company which owns Dimension database. It is created in 2018, and it has emerged as an important integrated data set for publications, grants, and patents. The best part with Dimensions is that it is a single platform which has all kinds of data included, integrated together. So it has 131 million publications, data for 6 million grants, 12 million data sets, 26 million online mentions, 886K policy documents, clinical trials, patents. Whereas if you use Web of Science, you need different subscription for patent data. So the best part with Dimensions is that it has all this data integrated together, on a single interface, you can look for all kinds of data. And the other good part with Dimensions is that it has the highest coverage. So Dimensions has about 80,000 journals that they cover. Now, if you cover more, there would be problems of quality. And that is how Dimensions may also have problems of data quality. But being a new database and being backed by a wonderful company, there are a lot of researchers, new techniques being used. Dimensions is constantly improving as a database. And it is, it is emerging as a good data source for doing scientometric research. Now, we know that there are different scholarly databases. Now, the next question would be what data is stored in these scholarly databases? So these scholarly databases, they store item metadata or article metadata as the main content. Okay. So what is this metadata? This metadata, so we don't store article full text in the scholarly databases. We include only the metadata. Full text is there in the digital library in the journal, because as per copyright laws, you can't reproduce articles without permission from the copyright owner. So these scholarly databases they do not violate copyright laws by storing the full text, but rather what they do is they are a repository of article metadata. So what kind of metadata is there? For example, article title, article type, whether it's a conference paper, whether it's a journal paper, whether it's a review paper, then DOI of the article, what is the publication source, so what is the journal in which it is published, or what is the conference in which it is published, which volume, which issue, publication year, who the authors wrote this article, then the abstract, keyword, subject area, cited references, time cited, funding test, etc. A lot of this metadata for each research article is stored in these databases. So for example, if I say that Web of Science indexes, let's say 13,000 journals. Now what it means is that all articles published in these 13,000 journals, you will have the metadata of these articles stored in Web of Science. Okay. And that applies to Dimensions as well. The metadata for all the articles published in all the 80,000 journals covered by Dimensions would be stored in their database. Now, as we know, most of these databases have billions of records. So these databases are huge, and they provide different kind of search interfaces, including user interface based search or including an API based search. Now, these are fields. I just try to have a quick, quick glance at the fields that are stored. So Web of Science has about 68 fields. So for each article, it has these fields of metadata. PT is publication type, author is author. Then we have PI is titles, so is source, and so on. DT is document type, CY is citations, and so on. Scopus has about 48 fields, authors, 2 fields for authors, title of the paper, year of publication, source title, volume, issue. Now this data can be exported in different formats. You can store this, you can export, you can look at this data and you can export it for working locally as an Excel file. You can export it as a tab delimited file, you can export it as a CSV file, and so on. Similarly, Dimensions also have number of fields. Now it has a rank of the publication, relevance ranking, then we have publication ID, DOI, PubMed ID, PubMed Central ID, title, abstract, acknowledgements, and so on. So all these are the metadata fields which are there for each article stored in Dimension. So each article which is stored in Dimension will have this amount of metadata stored. For each article, there would be one record in the Dimensions database which store all these information. So this data field can be used for different types of analysis. For example, we have publication metadata. So we can look at what is the total number of publications from an individual, total number of publications from an organization, total number of publications from a country, total number of publications in a particular area. Similarly, we can look at how many times a paper has been cited or a group of papers have been cited, or papers from a particular institution have been cited, or papers in a particular area have been cited. Then we can look at affiliation and we can create authorship networks. We can look at publication sources. So what are the major sources in which research from a particular organization or a particular individual or a particular country is published? Then we can create authorship and collaboration network. So we can analyze the collaboration patterns of an institution or a country. We can look at international collaboration patterns also. For example, if you want to know what amount of research output, let's say from Sri Lanka, is internationally collaborated, let's say during last 10 years, you can do an analysis and you can find out, and not only you can find out the volume of papers which are internationally collaborated, but you can also find out with which countries these are collaborated, with which institutions these are collaborated, and how many times they are cited, what are the cited references, what are the keywords and so on. Similarly, we have text fields in this metadata. We have title, we have abstract, we have keywords, we have concepts in dimensions. So they can be used for understanding thematic structure of research from a unit. Then we have social media activity, which is provided only in dimensions. So dimensions also has digital science has another company called Altmetric, and Altmetric data is integrated with dimensions, where we have UI linkages to social media data collected from aggregators and crawlers. And dimensions also has linking data to grants, patents, and clinical trials. So all this data can be used for a number of analysis. I will show you some examples. Let's look at the third part, which is talking about the examples. But before that, a quick definition of science policy, and then we look at how can we use Scientometrics as an evidence-based science policy instrument. Now, science policy, I just got the definition from Wikipedia. It says allocation of resources for conduct of science. Whatever resources that are there in a country, in what manner we allocate that for conduct of science, that would be a policy decision. Translation of scientific discoveries into technological innovation and transforming societies by providing solutions to improve social and economic conditions. So in the present era of knowledge-based economies, it is very important that we invest in science and technology research. We invest in innovations. So if we invest there, then we are going to progress not only in terms of scientific growth or scientific progress, but also it is bound to lead to economic progress, because now we are living in an era where knowledge is a kind of driving force for economic development. So the problem is that no country has unlimited amount of resources. So every country will have, or every organization will have, limited amount of resources, and that is where you have to create a policy. You have to make a policy that what is the best way, what is the most optimal manner in which we can utilize this money, we can utilize these funds to conduct science. So that is what science policy is about. Now, if we look at scientific research, well, Scientometricians largely see it only in terms of outputs. But what I'm trying to say is that we should see it in terms of totality. We should see in terms of not only what are the outputs that are produced, but also in terms of what input goes into the system and what is the overall enabling system like. Okay. So what are the outputs in science? We have publications, patents, clinical trials, innovative products, and scholarly databases provide us data for all this. So if you want to have a data for publications, scholarly database will give you. Patent database will provide you. Clinical trials, innovative products, the database will provide you. But these databases do not provide in terms of input quantities. So they have to be taken from different sources. For example, how many researchers are there in the country which could be treated, which could be termed as full-time equivalent? And this full-time equivalent, as we know, it is measured usually in terms of number of people per million. So how many people per million population are involved full-time in science and technology research career? Then we have GERD, what amount of gross expenditure. So this is called gross expenditure on research and development. So what proportion of GDP goes into research and development expenditure? So that is called GERD. Similarly, we have research grants, which could be extramural, which could be intramural. And one important input to research ecosystem is knowledge, access to knowledge. So unless you have access to databases, unless you have access to digital libraries, unless you have access to journals, unless you have access to papers published in conferences, there would be, you would be limited in terms of access to knowledge, which is an essential ingredient for doing more research. And the other things that are equally important is we need an appropriate enabling system. We need institutions, because what we need is, we need an institutionalized system of doing science. We need labs where science can be done. We need industry partners to focus on research and collaborate with universities and so on. So we need an overall enabling environment where scientific research can be done. What I'm trying to say is that since Scientometrics is more focused on outputs, most of the Scientometricians, they are largely looking at measurement at this particular level. But if we want to have a totalized measurement, or we want to have a total picture, then we should not ignore the other two things, and we should not see the outputs in isolation. We should also look at inputs and what kind of system. What is the amount of input goes into the system, and what is the overall system, how easy it is in the system to do research. So traditional Scientometrics, as we saw, it focuses more on output side. It uses scholarly databases. It uses them to compute indicators. Both size dependent and size independent indicators are computed. Research evaluation studies are done by Scientometricians at individual level, at institutional level, at country, at regional level. Then we have subject-specific studies or ad hoc studies, map research progress in a particular thematic area or a subject area, or to know collaboration between a group of countries and so on. So there are a lot of such studies which can be done, and all of them serve as an evidence. So I'm not saying that this evidence is less important or it is not important. What I'm trying to say is that this evidence is very, very important, but at the same time, we should also be having a broader view, where we should, if we are trying to compare countries, we should not compare them only by their outputs, but we should try to compare them with their normalized output values. So how many people are working? So try to have publications per capita, try to have publications per dollar spent, and so on. I'm picking up certain questions, and I'm showing you with India as an example, and the same could be done for any country if we have access to data. So suppose I have this question: where does a country stand globally in research output? So for example, I want to know, where does India stand globally in the scientific research output? Well, it's something very simple to do if we know how to do Scientometrics. What we can do is, we can obtain publication data from a scholarly database. This could be anything, Web of Science, Scopus, or Dimensions. We can analyze the year-wise data, and we can compute different metrics like growth rate, global share, global rank. We can compute values for other countries as well, and then we can compare, and then we can report. So all this data that you obtain, publication method that you obtain from scholarly database, this is a machine readable data that can be read by machines. It could be, you can use computer programs to run programs and to compute all these variables. For example, this is done for India, and if we look at 2010 to 19 data, to 19 data. Now I have picked up data from all the three databases, Web of Science, Scopus, and Dimensions. Now Web of Science says that India has improved its rank from 12th in 2010 to 10th in 2019. In terms of research publications, it has grown from 48,386 papers to 92,435 papers. In terms of average growth rate, annual growth rate, it is 8.48 in the most recent year, and the compounded annual growth rate is 6.7%. As per Scopus data, we have improved from 9th rank to 5th rank. And as per Dimensions data, again, we have improved from 9th rank to 5th rank. Why do we have these variations in rank? Because these databases have varied coverage. So Web of Science covers only 13,000 journals, Scopus covers 40,000 journals, Dimension covers 80,000 journals. So because of the coverage, there would be variations in terms of evidence, in terms of the values that we calculate. Similarly, we can compute the proportionate share. So if we want to find out what is the proportionate share of India, now we can see, so whatever database that you use, it clearly shows that India's proportionate share, global share in research contribution has increased. So from 2.15 to 3.26 as per Dimension, from 2.71 to 3.86 as per Web of Science, from 3.3 to 5.65 as per Scopus. But the underlying fact is that it has increased during 2010 to 2019. If you want to compare with other countries, we can pick up data for other countries. Now it shows that for 2010 to 19 period, USA has produced these many papers, followed by China, followed by UK and so on. India is somewhere here. You can look for any country and you can look at country rankings. And you can similarly see the global share. Out of the total research output produced in the world, 28% is contributed by USA, 14% is contributed by China. So this is for the last 10 year, 2010 to 19. As per Scopus, this data is, the rankings are slightly varying. India is now at number 5. And as per dimensions, India is at number 7. But USA, China, UK, Germany, they continue to remain on top in all the 3 databases. So whatever database that you draw your data from, USA, China, UK, Germany, they continue to remain on top. If we have another question, for example, we want to know what volume of research output is internationally collaborated and with which countries. For example, I want to know, I'm more interested in science diplomacy. I'm more interested in, which countries I should be collaborating with in which particular areas. So before that, I need to know what is the current status of international collaboration, with which countries we are collaborating, in which areas we are collaborating, and so on. So if we want to know this, what we can do is we can obtain publication data from a scholarly database for a given period. We can identify publications with at least one more country occurring in the author affiliation field. So you have to identify which publications are internationally collaborated papers and which are not. Then we compute the ICP instances over the time and plot the results, and we identify major collaborating partners. For example, in case of India, we see that during 2001 to 2019, the total papers has grown at a rate of 10.44%. And the ICP proportion, the proportion of the number of internationally collaborated papers has also grown at a faster rate. So at a rate of 12.49%. So in 2019 or 20, India has, this is Web of Science data for 2001 to 20. Now, as per Web of Science data, if you look at the recent year, about 25% of India's total research output involves international collaboration. So we call that as IRC, International Research Collaboration. Not only that, we can also identify which are the major collaborating partners. For example, in case of India, it is USA, Germany, and so on. We can also find out subject-wise variation. For example, in social science, 41% papers are internationally collaborated. So international collaboration proportion also varies with respect to subject. Arts humanities has only 25%. Biological sciences has only 24.15%. Now, third question, if we want to know what is the level of participation of women in research in a country. Nowadays, it's a very important call. Scientometrics again can play a role here with some additional programming that you have to do. What you can do is you can obtain publication data from scholarly database, extract the author name, and then identify the gender of each author name. So there are automated APIs that you can use for the purpose. And then once you have each publication tagged into, let's say, female first authored or male first authored, you can plot pictures like this, where you can say that, so on the right side, we have female by male first authored ratio. On the left side, we have total papers. So as you could see here, so this is female first authored papers. This is male first authored papers. And this is total papers in WS. Now, what you see here is female to male ratio. Look at the right axis. So it shows that we have improved from 0.35 to about 0.45 during 10 years period from 2008 to 2017. Not only this, again, there would be subject-wise variation. So we can find out that this varies with subject. For example, agriculture has a ratio of 0.47, whereas biological science has a ratio of 0.58. Engineering is poor, 0.26. Information science is also poor, 0.26, and so on. Another question, how to select? This is a very important question, a policy question that most of the funding agencies ask. How to select suitable institutions for funding in a given subject or thrust area? For example, every country has some thrust area. Let's say, for example, in case of India, we have cyber physical systems as a thrust area. We have quantum science as a thrust area. So if we have to invest in institutions for promoting research in a particular area, how do we select which institutions should be funded? Now, Can we use international rankings? Well, no. Why? Because international rankings have an issues of underrepresentation. The coverage is very poor. And IRF can also not be used because it has a different purpose. Subject-based rankings are now introduced in international ranking, but again, they suffer from issues of coverage and methodology-related limitations. So what is the other way? The other way is that we can form a peer review team, and this peer review team is going to evaluate which institution should be funded in a particular research area to promote research in that particular area. But again, how to select most suitable experts? That is itself a problem. There would always be possibilities of regional or institutional biases. Conflict of interest policies, well, they don't help much, at least in South Asian continent. And accountability is difficult to ensure. We can't go back to the peer review committee and say that, look, these institutions down the line after 3 years have not performed, so your assessment was bad or your assessment was poor. So, that's not going to work. So what we can do is we can use Scientometrics. What we can do is we can resort to performance-based funding. This could be ex post, ex ante. If we want to fund right in the beginning, it has to be ex ante. If we want to fund after evaluation, let's say by funding for 5 years and then evaluation, that would be called ex post. Now, Scientometrics can help bring in this positive discrimination, that we can find out what is the overall research background of different institutions, what is the matching research areas in which they are strong, and whether they have the potential to do good research in a thrust area that we are looking forward to. So they can be, and the better part is that they can be combined with peer review team to provide an evidence. So we can do an evidence-based policy formulation for performance-based funding in this particular situation. Similarly, we can answer many more questions. For example, we want to know simple trivial questions. Who are the most prolific researchers in a subject area from an institution or country? You can find out that. Who are the most cited authors in a subject area? You can easily find that. Which institutions do good in a given subject area, either by output or citations? You can find that. Scientometrics can also tell you what amount of research output from a unit is available in open access. Who are the major funders acknowledged in research output of a unit? That could be found easily with Scientometrics by looking at the funding text. What amount of public funded research output is available in open access? Now, this is very important because most of the funding agencies has this mandate that all public funded research should be openly accessible. So we can find out that what is the actual amount that is openly available. Then we have identifying knowledge clusters. For example, we can find out which areas are good in which subject, which subject specific research. So let's say, for example, in case of India, we can find out that which institutions are doing good in quantum computing, which are doing good in AI, which are doing good in whatever area. We can also find out, we can also do text-based analysis and visualizations for thematic structure output of a unit. So if you do thematic structure, it may look something like this. For example, this is AI for SDG data plotted using viewers viewer. So what is the artificial intelligence research? So this is worldwide data. AI research applied to sustainable development goals. And this is the major keywords that is occurring here. Convolutional neural networks, deep learning, smart cities, smart buildings, LSTM network, urban buildings, energy, and so on. So these are major concepts that are discussed in research, which is focusing on this particular area. So we can do a lot of thematic mapping and thematic structuring. So the impact of Scientometrics, well, the need for metrics in information science is very well understood. It is very widely recognized now. And Scientometrics plays an important role in research evaluation and quantitative formulas. However, at the same time, there's a tendency toward using quick and dirty statistics for evaluations, and uninformed applications could be very problematic, and this leads to a misuse of bibliometrics. So it has to be used in a proper manner, in an appropriate manner. So I now come to the last part, a very quick one, just 3-4 minutes more. Limitations and challenges. So one major point that you should keep in mind is whenever you do some Scientometric exercise, you have to pick up data from a scholarly database. So please keep in mind that different scholarly databases have different coverage. For example, almost all Web of Science is contained in Scopus. So all data that is there in Web of Science, almost all is contained in Scopus. As you could see here, WS indexes 13,610 journals, out of which 13,489 are also indexed in Scopus. So there are only few, just few hundreds which are exclusively indexed in Web of Science. Similarly, if you look at Web of Science and dimensions, almost all Web of Science is contained in dimensions. And if you look at scopus and dimensions, almost all scopus is contained in dimensions. So by coverage, what one may like to do is that you can use a database which has the largest coverage. But again, if you go for a database which has the largest coverage, you're going for a non-selective evaluation. So if you have a larger coverage, all kind of research output would be covered. So as a result, the selective coverage which is there in Web of Science would not be there. So please keep in mind that different databases have different coverage. And as a result, whatever computation that you do by drawing data from one database, if you draw the data from different database, the results are bound to vary. The second thing that you should keep in mind is that different databases have different subject classification schemes. There are primarily two subject classification schemes, source-based and article-level classification. The source-based says that a journal is permanently assigned to a subject category. So if you publish an article in that journal, that would also be assigned to the same subject category. So Scopus has different subject classification. Web of Science has different subject classification. So if you want to do any subject level analysis, the results may be different when you use different databases. So what is classified in psychology in one may be classified in multidisciplinary sciences in another. So this is a problem in terms of subject classification. Now, newer databases provide multiple subject classification schemes. For example, dimensions. It has classification which is also aligned to the national subject classification schemes. So dimensions provides almost 9 to 10 subject classifications where you can use whatever subject classification is appropriate to. Then subject-specific studies may show different results if data is drawn from different databases because of varied coverage and because of varied classification schemes. And this also we must keep in mind that publication propensity. So whatever database that you choose, the publications in life science, they're always many times higher as compared to information science or arts and humanities or social science. Now, as you could see here, almost all the three databases, so this is the whole data of Web of Science, Scopus and dimensions. And as you could see here, more than 40% of these publications are in life sciences. Then if you go another 20%, physical sciences. So technology is not very highly covered. Social science, arts, humanities are very poorly covered. So based on which area of research you are interested in, please keep in mind that if you have higher publication propensity in a subject area, the impact factors are bound to be higher. And that is how we know that journals publishing in medical science and biological science, they have higher impact factor as compared to journals which publish in mathematical science, because there's less publication activity in mathematical science as compared to biological science. If you publish more, you cite more, and as a result, your impact factor would be high. And this also is very important. If you're doing country-specific studies, please keep in mind that the number of journals published from a country is also found to be positively correlated with the research performance of the country. And you may be surprised to know that a majority of the journals still, so this is Scopus data, Scopus 40,000 journals of Scopus. Out of that, about 6,000 are published from USA, about 5,600 published from UK, about 3,000 published from Germany, about 1,500 published from Germany, about 2,000 published from Netherlands. So a major chunk of the journals are published from these areas. So many developing countries have very few journals published from them. And as a result, the research which is locally relevant may not find a place in international journals, because international journals are largely interested in topics which has international relevance. So if you have a research which is done in a local setting, which is locally relevant, it may not be published in journals which are globally visible in these databases. If you're looking for something which is purely local, then these databases may have limitation. So misuse and abuse, one has to be careful. Metrics are prone to misuse and abuse. Author level metric should always be situated in the context. It should be situated in what is the subject area that you're looking at, whether it is theoretical or applied. Then publication and citation patterns are always field dependent. As I told you, biological and medical sciences has higher citation activity as compared to mathematical science. And then there would also be size related effect. For example, input quantity based normalizations must be taken into account. So I would conclude by certain remarks. Well, Scientometrics as a methodology has a lot of potential to provide evidence for policy decisions. So this is very important. Across the world, Scientometrics is used as an evidence-based policy instrument. And so it was more in North. Now it is also being increasingly used in Global South. So there is a larger shift from, as you could see here, there is a global shift from trust-based funding to performance-based funding. So these metrics are going to stay. These metrics are going to be there. So the best option that we have is that we need to educate ourselves, and we need to make best use of them and informed use of these metrics. So there is a need for combining peer review systems with evidence-based policy mechanisms to make them more effective. So we can make peer review free from bias, more data-oriented, more data-based by combining Scientometrics with peer review systems. Knowledge production, dissemination, and monitoring are the key components to prosper in knowledge-based economy. And responsible use of methodology and the indicators can help inform many science policy decisions, whether it is performance-based funding, whether it is evaluations for research projects, whether it is evaluations of whatever kind. Scientometrics can provide a useful guideline. It can provide useful evidence. It can provide useful data, which could be used for a number of purposes. So thank you very much. This is all that I wanted to say. I just want to draw your attention to this site that we developed for India. So we call it Indian Science Reports. And this has a lot of data about, all this is pure Scientometrics. So we have Scientometrics applied to Indian scientific research, and then there's some reporting that we have done in indianscience.net. You may find it useful, and you may find it useful to be replicated in a different setting. So we would be happy to help, if somebody needs help in replicating or creating something similar. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions now, probably the moderators could take it up, or if you want to ask me later, this is my email. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Professor Singh, for this elaborate presentation. And it was so informative I'm sure that it was really informative for our colleagues from Sri Lanka. Actually, there are a couple of questions in the YouTube channel, but Dr. Shami has already alerted me that from the participants' perspective as well, they have to really leave. So if possible, please, maybe if you have time, sometimes you can answer these questions in the YouTube channels, and also for the participants, also they can ask more questions. We will try to answer in the YouTube channel itself. So yeah, and also as you already have shared your email ID, Professor Singh, I would encourage the participants also to contact you if they are really interested to continue their research on the Scientometrics. And yeah, considering the time limit, I will now hand over to Dr. Shami. And thanks again, Professor Singh. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I would be very happy to answer any questions later on. And we have a small group of about 10 people who, out of that, 6-7 people work in Scientometrics. And being from the background of computer science, it is slightly easier for us because, all this is data crunching, data analytics, and a lot of evidence that we could draw from computations of different kind. This is very useful. And so we are now pursuing it more as a passion rather than, as a subject to study. And that is how, it is something that interests us a lot. And I would be very happy if, anything that we do could be of help to anyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for Maumita and Vivek and Dr. Pragya. I think it's a wonderful presentation. It's really impressed by how you link Scientometrics to the science for policy decisions, and how the shift paradigm change to global south for the performance space from the global north. Thank you very much. And there are a lot of chat box, lot of participants are texting, or you are feel free to email me, then I can forward it to the Indian team, or you can direct to write to the Dr. Vivek or Dr. Maumita and regarding your questions. So we have to wind up very soon. So I just invite and one of our joint secretary of the Senior Scientist Forum of the Gnostic, National Science and Technology Commission. This is one of the consultative fora. And Ms. Manisha Rajapaksha give a brief vote of thanks. It's over, Ms.
Thank you, Shami. Good afternoon to all who have joined us on this online platform for the workshop on Introduction of Scientometrics. This was organized by the Department of Science and Technology, Center for Policy Research, Indian Institute of Science, along with the Open Science South Asia Network, OSAN, and also with the Senior Scientist Forum of the National Science and Technology Commission of Sri Lanka. As we all know, 10th of November was the World Science Day. And in Sri Lanka, we have declared the Ministry of, really the line ministry of us, that is the Ministry of Education, declared from 10th to 16th as the Science Week. So this webinar really coincides with the Science Week that has been declared in Sri Lanka. So to start with, let me thank Professor Vivek Singh from Baranas Hindu University of India for delivering that excellent informative lecture on scientometrics, which really reflects the importance of science policy in decision making. He sort of went on saying that evidence-based decision making is very important. I think this is a very important point for us to take in Sri Lanka. And then he went through the main databases, that's the Scopus, Web of Science, and the new one on dimensions. I think most of us are not aware of how much this new website, the database is giving us. And I think this presentation he gave us is not only important for the scientific community, it is really important to the policymakers, decision makers. And I'm glad that Professor Vivek has sort of extended his hands to Sri Lanka to help us in any way in this process. So thank you once again, Professor Vivek, for that excellent presentation you gave, and it was very informative for us. Now let me take this opportunity to thank Professor Abhinav Nandan, the coordinator of DST CPR, Indian Institute of Science, and principal investigator of OSAN for your cooperation. Dr. Maumiti Kohli, the SCI Policy Fellow at the DST CPR team leader OSAN, and the moderator of this webinar. Thank you, Dr. Kohli, for the moderating the event. Also, Dr. Pragna Chowbi, the project associate at the DST CPR and the lead OSAN for your cooperation, and Mr. Janab Bhadraj, the associate at DST CPR, Indian Institute of Science, and OSAN for providing the back-end services. And our gratitude goes to Board of Science and Society Funding Agency too. As we all know, and as Professor Vivek said, science and technology is one of the key factors in countries' development. And in this context, this webinar was very, will be very useful for us, for everyone who joined us. And I suppose anyone can now have a look at it. It's available on the YouTube. So I think the participants who joined us today would have gained a lot of knowledge on this area. And I think in future, we will be conducting such webinars by sort of very new topics, really, by the Senior Scientist Forum. So please be on the lookout and join us in the future webinars also. Then Professor Veranjan Karunatha, the chairperson of Gnostic. Thank you very much for your support extended to us in holding this webinar. Dr. Padma Kumara Jayasinghe, the chair of Senior Scientist Forum of Gnostic, for your guidance in conducting and organizing this webinar. And also I would like to thank Dr. Shami and the staff of Gnostic for the excellent coordination and organizing this event. And finally, I would like to say it was a privilege having all of you on this webinar, and really sort of listening to Professor Vivekananda was so educating for us also. I think it was his presentation was a database itself, right? So thank you once again for everyone who participated. And I think we will conclude the webinar session from now and hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Manisha. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Pragya, the Indian team and the participant. And Dr. Abhinav,
you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye.